So good morning. Thank you very much for joining our today's discussion on the parliamentary elections in Slovenia. Before we start our discussion, I will straight away pass the word to Felix Ofner, International Secretary of the Political Academy of the Austrian People's Party, for his welcoming remarks. Please, Felix, the screen is yours.
Thank you very much, Daniel. A very warm welcome from the Political Academy. We are very happy to partner in this event with the EDM, with the Institute for the Danube region and Central Europe, as well as the Karl Renner Institute. Unfortunately, our president is unable to attend today, but she sends her best regards and wishes us a great event. And thanks especially the EDM and of course the Renner Institute for this great cooperation we have. And I am as well want to say a big thank you to Daniel and to Sebastian Schäfer and the team for this great series of events we have. Always kind of discussions about these elections in the Danube region in Central Europe. And I think we have a very beneficial offer we can give to our people to have a look into these elections. But yeah, let's have a bit of a greater look on the European landscape at the moment. Europe and the European Union especially is dealing with threats unprecedented in its history. We still find ourselves in the middle of an ongoing pandemic. And of course, the Russian government is waging war in Ukraine, which is presenting another very, very big challenge to the European Union as well. Putin just started his military offensive in the eastern region of Ukraine, and pictures like the ones we saw from Bucha leave us in fear for the people of Maribor, Kharkiv, and the Donbas region. This war has to be stopped at once, and we, the European Union, play a very important part in this, with sanctions and in a joint solidarity with Ukraine. Despite Putin's intentions by this war to destabilize the EU, we are more united than ever. I'm sure about that. Having said this, I would now like to speak about the connections between Slovenia and Austria, because of course Slovenia is our main focus today and the topic we want to speak about. This connection between Austria and Slovenia has always been a very special one, and in many forms a great one. Of course, on the one hand, geographically, Slovenia is our neighboring country, and in Carinthia and Styria, there are large Slovenian minorities with about 17,000 people. In 1991, Austria, especially our foreign minister back then, Alojz Mok, was one of the first to strongly advocate international recognition of the independence of Slovenia and Croatia from Yugoslavia. Until today, Slovenia and Austria are connected by a friendship economically and diplomatically. And I think the basis for this was laid when Austria and especially Alojz Mok were strongly supporting Slovenia back then in 1991. In our work at the Political Academy, amongst other things, we have a strong focus on all the Balkan states and the way of the Western Balkan states in the European Union, of course. Because, and let me be clear about that, especially as Austrians, we are sure about that, and I think all my colleagues here from Slovenia will hopefully agree on that. Without the Western Balkan states as members of the EU, we will not be complete as European Union. Of course, there are a lot of challenges to overcome here before we can welcome the Western Balkan states into the European Union, but nevertheless, a respect for dialogue and dialogue at an eye level is required in order to overcome these trenches. The integration of the Western Balkan in the EU would also positively affect, of course, Slovenia, I think not only economically, but also in other ways. As the Political Academy of the Austrian People's Party, we have an educational mandate under the law. We see ourselves as a space for development and as a place where discussions can take place away from daily politics in Austria. But of course, as already mentioned, we also focus on Eastern Europe and on the Balkans. And that's why we are very proud, as also said in the beginning, on this event series with the EDM and the Renner Institute, because I think it's a very big, it's very positive that we can provide insights in these elections in countries which are as near as Slovenia is and all the other countries in the Danube region and Central Europe. Maybe one last remark on our relationship with Slovenia, and maybe a little something you could maybe look into as well if you have time. You can find it on our website. Last year we honored the 30 years anniversary of the sovereignty for Slovenia and Croatia with an event with very distinguished guests. Amongst others, our foreign minister, Alexander Schallenberg, was here, as well as, and I'm very proud of that, Alojz Peterle, Prime Minister of Slovenia back then in 1991, joined us and held some very interesting remarks on how the situation was back then and how Austria, Slovenia and Croatia coordinated to make the best out of the situation and get sovereignty and then get the recognition internationally. With events like this, we want to remember important political events in Europe on the one hand, and on the other hand, we want to show that peace and democracy are not given but fragile privileges. I think the war in Ukraine shows shockingly how fragile this peace and this stable democracies are. Yeah, now back to the discussion at hand today. I hope you all will get good insights into the initial situation of this election, as well as the possible impact on politics in Slovenia. Let me give one last remark on our offerings regarding this election. I'm also very happy that we always provide an election briefing afterwards the event. And thank you very much, Mr. Lovec, that you are giving the briefing today. I think it's a great thing that we can offer not only the people who are attending this event today an opportunity to have an insight into the election, but also everyone else who is maybe not able to attend today. So I wish you a very interesting discussion. I hope you get some good insights. And thank you very much. Interesting to hear your remarks on the election, on the upcoming election. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Felix, for your welcoming remarks. You already touched upon a couple of things we are definitely going to discuss during our following discussion. And also, thank you very much for sharing, shedding some light on the relations between Austria and Slovenia, which are also very much important, also within the framework of our today's discussion. Before we start, please let me introduce also myself. My name is Martínek, and I am a research associate at the IDM Institute for the Danube region in Central Europe in Vienna. I will guide you through our today's panel discussion, virtual panel discussion, which, as has been already said, is part of our traditional series jointly organized together with the Political Academy of Austrian People's Party and Karl Renner Institute. I would like to thank very much to our cooperation partners for the always excellent cooperation. Maybe to summarize a little bit what we actually did in the last couple of weeks. Exactly 3 weeks ago, we discussed the presidential, parliamentary, and local elections in Serbia. 2 weeks ago, we analyzed the election of the old-new parliament in Budapest. And today we are focusing on the developments in another Austria's neighboring country. This time we take a look to Ljubljana, where National Assembly is about to be elected on the upcoming Sunday. To analyze the pre-election situation, our invitation has been accepted by three excellent experts from different areas of expertise. I would like to warmly welcome Tanja Porčnik, President of the Visio Institute from Maribor. Tanja, thank you very much for accepting our invitation. Second speaker would be Primož Cirman, journalist and editor-in-chief of the media platform Necenzurirano with a seat in Ljubljana. Primož, it's great to have you today. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Hope to have a great discussion, and thank you for having me.
And last but not least, we have with us today Marko Lovec, who is Associate Professor at the Center of International Relations of the University of Ljubljana. Marko, thank you very much for joining us and for your availability. And now, before we start our discussion, as it was already mentioned by Felix at the beginning, I would like to give the floor or the screen to Marko, who provide us with a short briefing or short overview on the current situation in Slovenia, and also maybe on some elements or aspects of the election campaigns and how the pre-election situation actually looks like right now in the country. So Marko, please, the screen is yours.
Okay, so I'll now share my screen, and thanks again for having me. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can. Perfect.
Okay, just a second. Let me find. Okay, so I received a number of bullet points which I'm supposed to address, and I hope I will be able to do that in 10 minutes. So what the organizers of this event expected me to do is to present an overview of a situation in Slovenia before the coming Sunday elections. So first, if you look at the reports on Slovenia, reports by different international organizations, you can see that Slovenia is generally considered as a consolidated democracy. So we are a democratic country with no major issues you would see in some other East European countries or countries beyond Europe. However, there are certain issues, and those issues that come up most frequently in those reports are very strong polarization, so polarized political space where center-left and center-right parties would not want to engage in any sort of cooperation, but would use more conflicting rhetoric and conflicting political tactics. And then there's also some interference with media, judiciary, and civil society, as well as corruption. Systemic corruption is also something that has been mentioned by a number of reports on institutional quality. And this does not refer just to the current government, but those issues are sort of more general. They go back also to many previous governments that we had before the current one. And then also in a number of reports and studies, you can see that Slovenia was sort of a star pupil, a very successful country, a top performer in Eastern Europe for a number of years, or we could say for the first and second decade of our independence. But then after that, things have changed. Some changes already occurred after the Slovenian EU membership, so one could see certain types of declines in terms of institutional quality. But then with the EU crisis, especially Eurozone crisis, and then also the migration crisis, things have changed dramatically in Slovenia. There has been strong deconsolidation of the center-left part of the political space. So many parties disappeared, many new parties appeared, many new parties which won elections then after that very soon lost support. and at the same time, along with this instability on the center-left part of the political spectrum, there has been sort of a radical turn towards more nationalist, more extreme politics by Slovenian Democratic Party, which is the most important center-right party in Slovenia. It's the current government party, and throughout the last 20 or 30 years, it has been the most often the most important opposition party. And this party also has sort of a hegemonic position on the center right, which means that its policies, its positions are essential for the overall policies and positions of the center right parties in Slovenia. At the moment, we have Janša's third government. So this is the third time Janša, leader of Slovenian Democratic Party, was able to put together a governing coalition. And this party has been in position, this government has been in position since 2020, when after the collapse of the center-left government and with the beginning of the pandemic, he was able to take power and to put together a government coalition. This third government of Janša has been facing different accusations, criticisms for its authoritarian style of government, for certain controversial moves, both domestically and internationally. So this is it's been in the headlines. I'm sure you've heard about many of those cases. But I would say that the thing that has been perhaps the most important characteristic of this government, at least from my perspective, is a bit different. I would say that this government has been characterized by very strong pragmatism, and we can see why. It's a minority government, so it needs to seek this support. It needs support to be able to go on. It needs support it needed support from individual MPs, and at the same time there were major changes in international environment during the course of the last 2 years. Many things have changed, and this has pressured this government to adapt, to accommodate, and to very swiftly change some of its policies, and I'll come to that a bit later. So I was also asked to talk a little bit about the state of democracy and freedom of press in Slovenia. So specifically about freedom of press. Here you can see the ratings of Slovenia according to Freedom House and its nations in transit rating. You can see that Slovenia is doing quite well. So score 7 is the highest score a country can get, and you can see that we are quite close. But you can also see that media freedom is something, is sort of it is an issue in Slovenia. So in the area of freedom of press, we are not doing that well. And you can also see certain declines in the last year, which have to do with the behavior of the current government. And I think that just today, the most recent report was published by Freedom House. I think that the country narrative is not available yet, but scores are. And according to today's scores, Slovenia will or has further declined in the area of media freedom. So what are the particular issues that constrain media freedom in Slovenia? First, I would say that this is it is unstable and instrumental ownership of media, which includes partisan ownership. Now, again, it's not just a thing that for which Slovenian Democratic Party or current government could be held responsible. It's sort of a broader issue. Perhaps Slovenian Democratic Party is just an actor that is doing certain things in very brutal, very visible ways, but the issues are more general and have to do with different political actors. And then we have various forms of interference with media. We had a number of rhetorical attacks. There's this partisan logic present when it comes to the debates on media, sort of which presents media as an extension of party politics and not as an independent actor in the society. And finally, many journalist organizations complain about lack of social and legal protection. Now, what about youth involvement or uninvolvement in politics in Slovenia? This was another issue I was asked to discuss a little bit. So if we look at the data and studies, we can see that formal participation of youth, so this is active and passive participation at the elections, either in terms of them going to the elections to vote or taking part in party politics. So in these formal terms, youth participation is under EU average in Slovenia, but at the same time, when it comes to informal forms of participation, so for example, youth engaging in protests or civil society activities, political participation in Slovenia is actually above the EU average, which shows that there might be something wrong with political structures, with party structures in Slovenia, which are not open enough so that younger generations would get involved. I think that in the recent 2 years, because of a number of things, this mobilization of youth participation and youth engagement have strengthened for a number of reasons. For example, we have long-term trends and issues such as flexible work, issues with housing not being available, environmental issues, but at the same time, we also had measures to tackle pandemic, government measures, which were sort of harsher on younger generations, and this triggered stronger mobilization on their part. Here on the right side of the screen, you can see a comparison between youth participation at the last parliamentary elections and participation at the recent referendum on water, which was held a year and a half ago. And you can see this increase in youth participation, which at the recent referendum, it reached the share, which is also the share of youth, of young people in the overall electorate. So here you can see this increase in youth mobilization and engagement in formal types of politics. What about the European and regional politics? As I've mentioned before, following different EU crises and following a number of turbulences in Slovenia, many things have changed. So center-left part of the political spectrum has sort of fallen apart and was not able to keep a pace and to be in touch with the European level politics, to establish relations with similar parties in other countries and so on. And at the same time, on the center-right side of the political spectrum, Slovenian Democratic Party has sort of moved rightwards. It has made an alliance with Orban regime, also with Trump administration and other similar actors. So it has become a member of sort of a nationalist, also Eurosceptic international, if if we could put it this way. However, more recently, perhaps since the later part of the Slovenian EU Council presidency in the second half of the last year, Slovenian government did take more moderate positions and did turn more, towards the political center. Janša did attempt did try to gain some positive coverage from international media to get some legitimacy, and we could see this, for example, in the Ukraine, in his international positions on the Ukraine as well, and we could also see that in the last part of the Slovenian EU Council presidency, where he also turned quite pragmatic in order, to be praised at the end by the representatives of the EU institutions. At the same time, during the mandate of the recent government, we have seen more cooperation with Visegrad countries, also this new format emerging of Central Five, where Austria, Slovenia, Hungary, Czech Republic, and Slovakia cooperated. And we've also seen improvement of bilateral relations with Croatia. However, a part of many events, many meetings, many hands being shaken, we've not seen many concrete results. So concrete results are, yet to come. Finally, what we could say about Slovenian, European, and regional politics is that in the last 2 years, we've seen lots of very strong, also very rude rhetoric and lots of politics of visual effects, which we could say in a way have hidden actual weaknesses of Slovenia, past turbulences, Slovenia not being in touch anymore with or being important in the context of the European politics. However, at the same time, it's not just a politics of visual effects. It's also something that shows very good understanding of what people actually think in Slovenia about the EU and the changes with that regard that have happened in the last 10 years. Because if you look at the polls, you can see that Slovenians are quite pro-EU oriented. However, at the same time, most of Slovenes would say that the problem of Slovenia is that our voice doesn't count in the EU, that our position is weak, and so on. So in a way, what Janša has been doing in the last 2 years has, in a very smart way addressed this sentiment of Slovenes who believe that we are sort of politically weak in the context of European and international politics. So I must say, even though I disagree with many things that Janša have done, I must say that the things that they are doing are, quite nicely supported by data, by polls and similar things, which is something that you do not often see with other parties in Slovenia. Okay, now to turn finally to the Sunday elections and what we can expect from the Sunday elections. We can see that there are two important parties which compete for relative victory at the Sunday elections. One is Slovenian Democratic Party and the other one is Movement for Freedom, led by Robert Golob, and both of those parties have had quite stable support in the last weeks. But then at the same time, there's a number of other parties, also a number of small parties which are close to the threshold, and because of that, we cannot be certain and which of those smaller parties will actually enter parliament. So this makes a prediction about possible coalitions rather uncertain. So it seems that there will be more parties on the center left who will be able to enter the parliament, which makes a center left coalition more likely. But at the same time, there have been some affairs published very recently in the last days about Robert Golob, and also we know that right-wing parties have more traditional voters who will more likely go to the elections on Sunday. So besides the fact that we have several small parties close to the threshold, the actual turnout on Sunday is another factor why the outcome is a bit uncertain. So I would say that both center-left and center-right coalition are possible, but that at the moment it seems center-left coalition is more likely. One interesting thing you can see here on this slide is the so-called Ukraine effect. You can see that in the first 2 weeks after the war of Ukraine, support for SDS went up a little bit, and this lasted for sort of 2 weeks, and then it went down again. And at the same time, support for Levica, so this sort of radical left party in Slovenia, went down. So Janša was able to take advantage of the war of Ukraine to boost his support a little bit. At the same time, Levica, because of its pacifism, anti-NATO position, lost some of its support, but this was temporary. And it was also interesting because if you would, ask yourself whether Luka Mesec, leader of Levica, or Janez Janša is a figure more similar to Janez Janša, I think that the answer to that is quite clear. Okay, finally, some interesting details from the campaign. Here on the left side, you can see the main slogan of Slovenian Democratic Party: "No experiments." So what does this mean? For Slovenian Democratic Party, this experience of communism that we've had, as well as new faces, new parties coming up, getting support of tactical voters on the center left, are considered as an experiment, which we should avoid also because of the communist experiment we've had for 70 years. And the other slogan they have is "We build Slovenia," because of all the funds that were available by the EU as well, which boosted investments in infrastructure and so on. And then Robert Golob's party, their main slogan is "Freedom." Again, for many reasons. On one hand, COVID measures were quite, harsh and unbalanced often. And on the other hand, pressures on media, civil society, judiciary. So this is why they went for this centrist slogan, "Freedom." Other parties, Social Democrats, I think they made a huge mistake with their slogans. "Different." This was a huge mistake to take "different" as the main slogan. It's sort of saying we are different from you, we are multicultural, whatever. I think it's a mistake. Their other slogan, which was "No promises," is also probably a huge mistake, because parties should offer sort of a vision for the future. They shouldn't say "no promises." Another interesting thing, if you look at the two parties that are just below the threshold, Alenka Bratušek's party and Alexander Pivec's party, they both use the term courageous. And why do they do that? Well, they are just below the threshold. They are female leaders, and there's this hidden reference to the Ukraine. Because who would thought that Zelensky would, be able to stand against Russia? So he has demonstrated this courage, and courage of Zelensky was a big inspiration for many in the West. So this is why probably those two parties, which are both below the threshold, have decided to use the term courage to show that they are able to, pass the threshold, even though the odds are against them. And now this is my final slide. What may happen in case of center-left or center-right coalition after the elections? I think that if we have a center-left coalition, there will be perhaps less of visible pressures on independent institutions in Slovenia. We will see some progressive policies, for example, on environment, energy. We are being pressured by the EU. We had to pay last year for statistical transfer of renewable energy sources, production and things like that. So we have to step up our activities there. But at the same time, I'm sure Slovenia will be nowhere on international media headlines in the future years, which might be good or bad. It depends on the perspective you would take on that, considering what Janša has been doing during the last 2 years. On the other hand, if we have a center-right government, I think we will continue to see a sort of a hybrid domestic and foreign policy, attempts of Janša's government to consolidate its regime, to liberalize some of the policies, but at the same time to go in the direction that we have seen in Hungary. And also in international context, things have changed. Populists, Eurosceptics have been under pressure during the last 2 years. So Janša will have to accommodate to that, will have to be more moderate. He will need to seek for support of Western countries. He needs this support of United States. on many ways, so he needs to be pragmatic on that. But at the same time, I'm sure he will also look for opportunities to align again with forces similar to Trump, Orban, and so on and so forth. Okay, thanks for having me, and I'm sorry if I was too long.
Thank you very much, Marko, for this, maybe not a brief one, but definitely overwhelming and very informative overview or briefing on the current situation in Slovenia. I think you covered many issues we are also going to discuss now during our upcoming discussion. But I think before we dig deeper into these issues, I would like to maybe start with my favorite and traditional question on all of you. And it is actually, is there something special about this year's parliamentary elections in Slovenia? Because many experts say actually that it's kind of historical momentum if the people decide on the continuation of the current government policies, or if they choose another different political path. So I would suggest that we start with Tanja. What would be your take on this? Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation. In terms of the answer to the question, I don't think this election is any different than a few previous elections. Perhaps the opposition is trying to rally the voters with such a position as you proposed, in terms of that this is a big election that they shouldn't miss, that they should turn to the polls and vote, of course, for them. I don't see this election. I actually see this election a little bit as being boring, as a kind of just repetitive of what we have seen in the past. Sure, we have a big new party, but this party is kind of consolidating several actors that have been in politics in the past. Sure, the leader, Mr. Golob, wasn't in politics before, but around him are many people also behind him that have been in Slovenian politics. For that reason, for me, this election is not a turning point, rather indication that Slovenia hasn't grown up, because politics is still in many ways like a infant, like a child that hasn't grown up, in terms of knowing that politics is not just a hobby, but you really need to practice the skill. You need to learn how to do politics. And if not just these newcomers, but also in general, the population knew that, not that they wouldn't vote for a newcomer or someone that cannot present a program with like solid public policy program and what they will do, and people that will be ministers, but just that the general public would expect that from politics. It's not important that you are in politics forever, but it is important that you know what you're doing once you are in power. So for this reason, I think Slovenia is still learning. We are 30 years old, but we are still so young in terms of how politics should work. So I don't see this election being as a turning point for Slovenia. Unfortunately, I wish it was. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanja. Primož, what would be your take on this issue? Do you think also that Slovenia isn't grown enough?
Well, first of all, Slovenia has only too many people, so I don't believe it will grow much more, if I'm joking. But I have to disagree here with Tanja. There is a sentiment here, especially in Ljubljana, that these elections are different than previous one. The first visible sign is early vote. As of today, as the first 2 days of early vote, 84,000 people attended and submitted early votes. That's a record-breaking number in Slovenia. There were never election when there was such a turnout for first 2 days of early votes. And that means that probably the turnout for election in total in Slovenia will probably be highest in the last 22 years. I think the last turnout in 2018 was around 52%. That means that out of 1.7 million people with right to vote, only 900,000 people attended election. And why was that? Well, because Slovenia has the same problems in that regard as young democracies in Eastern Europe. That means that transition and democracy has caused, and privatizations that were sometimes brutal has caused the feeling of disappointment with political elites, and people lost their cultural and other identities, and so basically they started to they did not believe in state anymore as an institution. So basically we say here that they live as if a state or doesn't exist. They don't care what happens in politics. But this now has changed in last 2 years. Why? Because in last 2 years, as Marko has presented, the government of Janez Janša established practices that were, I would say, brutal in some regard, but were very different than previous one. Well, COVID epidemic is only part of this answer. Why? The handling of COVID epidemic in Slovenia was quite specific. It's basically, there's a feeling here that Janša's government has used pandemics to introduce some say authoritarian practices, especially in taking over media, attempts to take over or pressure judicial system and independent institutions, especially regulations. In Slovenia, for instance, the role of parliament during COVID epidemics were virtually minimized because the government basically ruled with executive orders that that went beyond parliament. So basically, parliament did not even decide on these issues. And of course, the other feeling is that that is also confirmed by some independent reports of international institutions, that these elections are very important because there's a sentiment that if Janša wins this time, it will be for good. So that basically he will be able to rule not only one mandate, only 2 mandates, just like in Hungary, because it's the second time in history that he basically enters the election from the position as a head of government, and he's basically erased the border between the government institutions and his party. So I think this is the biggest story of this election, is that basically the ruling party is directly using government institutions to promote campaign. It's basically for instance, one example, the head of the Office for Communications of Slovenian government is basically paying to social media, is paying ads that are basically the same ads that are also ads of the ruling party. So I think that's on this discussion we have to address, I think, one issue, and that's the financial non-transparency of the political campaign, because I do not believe that there's a level playing field, because we have a ruling party here which is a major financial powerhouse in comparison to other parties, and this party had a huge influx of Hungarian money from oligarchs close to Viktor Orban to its media that it owns. So back to your question, no, I personally do not think that these are ordinary elections. I think these elections are maybe the most important elections after the referendum in December 1919, where Slovenia, after which Slovenia declared independence.
Thank you very much, Primož. Marko, what would be your take on this issue? Do you think that there is not an equal playing field when it comes to this year's elections, and what would be your take on this decreasing trust in state institutions and its influence on the maybe election result this year?
So I'm sure that elections in terms of votes, of vote counting, will be fair. So I have no doubts that votes will be counted in a fair way. Now, about the debates and access to media and things like that, it's complex, and there are some things that should have been done differently on all the sides, on the sides of everyone that is involved in these elections. Now, I would just like to make, many things that we could discuss, but I would just want to point out one interesting thing, which I think is a mistake. It is a mistake that the current government has done. I think that this mandate of the current government was a huge opportunity for Janša, for his party to change, to transform, and to seize the political center. At the beginning of the pandemic, support for the government was really high, considering the image Janša and this government has had in the past years. They've managed to attract considerable support in the beginning of its mandate. But then after that, they have done many things wrong, and it had to do with a misconception of how things have been changing internationally, and they have been going against populists and Eurosceptics in the last 2 years. They have been going against those who believe that autocrats and the failure of the EU institutions will be the trends for the years to come. So it was a huge mistake. And now see how, based on this mistake, Janša and his party have created their own strongest opposition. Take leader of the Freedom Movement Party, Robert Golob. So Janša and his party, they have created this guy as their opponent. They have not extended his mandate. Okay, perhaps it was the right thing to do, not extend the mandate, but in the context in which they have used the government authorities to appoint many people in different places, many people who were close to, who had linkages to their own ranks. This sounded as if government is interfering with business, with the economy, is putting their people on important positions. So they have created this guy as their main opponent. And then let's look at other key members of the movement of freedom. You have a journalist, Mojca Šetin-Spášek, who's called a prostitute by our prime minister. So this very rude, brutal, rhetorical attack she faced basically created her as the opponent of the current government. And then another example, another person, former judge who was also attacked by media close to the current government, who's another important person and candidate on the list of Robert Golob's party. So you have it, attacks on independent business, economy, attacks on judiciary and media. You have them personalized within the party of Robert Golob. But of course, on the other hand, we can understand the importance of the fact that people on the center left, that they do see somebody who's able to counter Janša, who has this sufficient support, who's able to attract tactical voters. Voters on the center left in Slovenia are very tactical. So to have a figure which can oppose Janša is very important for them. It's very important for political tactics. However, at the same time, as Tanja has also mentioned, it's also a sign of a very immature democracy, because it's a party that came out of nowhere like 2 months ago, and it's a party which has none of the features that party would need to have to be sustainable, to go on a longer run. So it's a party that doesn't have a very credible leader with a track record in politics on different levels and things like that, what you would expect from a political leader of such a party that could take over the government. It doesn't have a clear program, and it doesn't have a clear membership. So it's just tactical voters. And now in the recent days, we had this affair with the banking account in Romania. And I'm sure that there will be many such cases. There might be many in the days and months to come if he becomes prime minister, and he will probably go down the same road as Miro Cerar has gone before him. So from the perspective of stability of democracy, accountability, and the role parties play for that, we cannot be very satisfied with what we have available on the Sunday's menu.
Thank you very much, Marko. I would like to actually continue on your intervention here, but before I do so, I would like to remind and encourage our audience, be it here in the room at IDM or be it in the Zoom webinar, or for the ones who are following us on our IDM YouTube channel, please post your question in the chat on YouTube or here in Zoom in QA section, and I will then pass them to our speakers. Yeah, as I said, I would like to continue with this role of opposition during these elections and the role of Robert Golob as a kind of newcomer. It turned out in the past that these newcomers can be quite successful in the Slovenian politics. So I would like to ask you, Tanja, how do you evaluate the chances of Robert Golob and his movement Freedom? And because it seems, according to the polls, that it's kind of neck to neck race with the Slovenian Democratic Party. So how do you think, how high are the chances of Robert Golob and his party?
So the polls are showing pretty good results. All of the polls that are done, they might, even surpass Slovenian Democratic Party. But it was so the result at the election for them, it's going to be good. So I don't think any affair that is even going to come out in the last couple of days, or the one that Dr. Lovec mentioned, that with the account, bank account, I don't think that is going to decrease their result at the election. However, I do want to tie this to what has been discussed earlier, which is what is going to happen if they run the government, if they become, not just that Mr. Golob becomes prime minister, but that his party leads the government. It's a big question. It's basically unknown. Who are going to be, not just who are going to be their members of the parliament, but also who are going to be ministers. I think the only person that they mentioned as a potential minister is the minister for health ministry. Other than that, it's unknown. So it can go, in any direction. It can be someone experienced. It can be someone that has expertise, but probably is just going to be someone kind of like a number 10 or number 11 that they are going to call, because from experience, even Dr. Cerar, that when they were calling, and he has a good standing in Slovenian legal society and also in political circles, when they were calling for, people that they would like to be appointed ministers, people said no, because we have seen in Slovenian politics that being an expert, you get burned. If you expose yourself, if you want to be, a part of the government, it's just kind of eventually a stain on your career. You don't get a chance to put in place your knowledge to further public policy or to pass significant legislation that is going to change situation in Slovenia. So experts are very hesitant to accept such invitation. So in terms of Mr. Golob, I think if he came on the scene 10 years ago, I think he would have better chances at, attracting really good candidates for posts of ministers. But in this situation in Slovenia, it's going to be super hard, even if he wants to have good people in a cabinet. But then at the end, it's also a question of, we have seen with SMC, which is the party, at first it was the party of Miracera, but then it was a modern center party. Because they were also formed just a few months before the election, and it was just, people from everywhere that they knew, that kind of a network of friends. And it ended up being two poles, one was more liberal, and one was more social democrats. And that created a lot of tension within the party. Like, what is their agenda? What are their policy positions? And that created a lot of chaos within the party, and then eventually also in the government. We have seen that this social democrat part leaving the party, creating a lot of issues. So I wouldn't be surprised if something like this happened also with the movement Freedom, with Mr. Golob's party. Hopefully it doesn't, because that is going to not just, create the problems, but also any government, if they are in the government. So I think there are a lot of roadblocks, a lot of learning that they will have to do if they are in government, or if they are in a position. As I mentioned earlier, politics is a learning process, and people entering politics have no idea how much they have to learn in order to be successful at ruling, at being successful as a political party, being successful at whatever they set out to be. I think there's a lot of naivety. Everyone wants to be a prime minister in Slovenia. Just look at how many people are on the list. Like, we all have 20 political parties. Everyone wants to be in a prime minister. No one wants to work with other people and kind of have a big political umbrella. But, once they are there, they have kind of no idea what they are doing unless they were in government before. So I think that's going to hit them very hard, all of these challenges, if we have a center-left government. But that is not good for Slovenia, because that might mean 4 years of learning and roadblocks and a lot of issues for them. So maybe in the next 4 years they will be learning, and Slovenia will be kind of stagnating, not changing anything to the better. And then maybe if in the next 4 years, after 4 years, they are again successful in the elections, they might be able to then, I think, implement something significant. But I am skeptical that they can, in the first 4 years, implement something major that would change legislative framework of Slovenia, or things that or structural reforms, like that are desperately needed in Slovenia. So that's my take. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanja. I would simply continue with your thoughts, and because you already came across this issue. So, Marko, do you have the same opinion? Don't you think that if the freedom movement would join forces maybe with some other center-left parties, that they have maybe higher chances to form a government? And another question would be, how stable would be this new government given these differences and different political agendas? What is your take on this?
So yeah, you've asked me, not Primož. Okay. I think that, so on Sunday, people sort of in Slovenia have to choose between two suboptimal choices, two suboptimal options. One is a leader who might, be too effective and too strong, which would have negative consequences for institutional quality, policies, and other things in Slovenia, also, for stability on the long run. On the other hand, you have a choice of somebody whom, you don't really know what you will get. You know that his antipode of Janša's politics, but there's lots of uncertainty, which goes back to some of the negative experiences we've had with new leaders and new parties in the past. Probably for most of the voters, also considering this experience with Janša's government, now the priority is not to have Janša for another 4 years, and this is also why Golob has a bit of a better chance of putting together a coalition, which is what you've asked me. So Golob cannot rule by himself. He will not have an absolute majority on Sunday, and he will need support of other center-left parties. And those who stand a chance of passing the threshold are Social Democrats, and then Levica, the left, and probably also Marian Šarc's party. And then there's also a chance that Alenka Bratušek, her party is currently just below the threshold, will also enter parliament. And this would enable to put together a coalition, okay, but a firm majority. With a firm majority, however, the coalition will be sort of quite broad, a bit fragmented, and we've seen in the past tensions occurring, especially after the leading party led by a newcomer faced different allegations, different things not being done as people would expect them to be done, people without proper track record being appointed to different positions, issues of corruption and things like that. So when this happens, it's not just that public support goes down, which it is a problem if you want to do structural reforms and things like that. But another thing that would happen is that other parties, other coalition parties, would try to seize the chance of squeezing you out of political space and of retaking some of the political space and support, and this creates then tensions within the coalition and blockages which hinder any major actions, any major moves by political parties. And when you have some traditional players in coalition and some radical players such as Levica, the left, well, in many ways they are not that radical. They are not proposing to reestablish communist regime or whatever. However, their voters are extremely sensitive to issues that have to do with mainstream politics, corruption, and things like that. So they need to distance themselves from the government whenever something is being done that is considered as problematic by their electorate. So in a way, they have to distance themselves from the government whenever the government becomes too centrist, faces allegations of corruption and things like that. So,
thank you, Marko, for your comment. I see that we are already collecting some questions from our different channels. But before that, I see that Primož raises his virtual hand. So please, would you like to share your perspective?
Well, I do not completely agree with Marko. I think that he said that he will have a choice between two suboptimal positions. I think that's rather nihilistic position. So that means nothing will ever change. We are all condemned to our life in dark Slovenia. But I would say that we have two very clear and optimal positions. On one side, there's a choice between, on one side, there's a model introduced by Viktor Orban on international level and domestic level. That means on one side, you have a currently ruling party, a right-wing ruling party that has no intention to preserve some democratic standards in Slovenia, who likes to attack institutions, who likes to submit institutions. We have a president, we have a prime minister who is basically very sensitive to any way of criticism. So therefore he brutally attacks anyone who says anything against him or about him. And on international level, of course, this option means that Slovenia will furtherly slide towards Visegrad group, especially Poland now, after the beginning of Ukraine war, which has broken this block of between Budapest and Warsaw. And I think that Mr. Janša is now basically searching for place in between Orban, which is his good friend and also financier of his media, and Warsaw, which has the same position on Ukraine, and of course has also some ideological similarities. And on the other hand, there is a possibility of coalition of liberal, social, and social democratic parties that are party that is that will preserve Slovenian democracy in a way that is now, and institutions. But of course, there's always question whether this will be weak government or not. But that all depends on the outcome of the votes. You had, for instance, minority government, which was run by left to center party of Marjan Šarec, which was deemed very weak. And you had now minority party, which was run by Mr. Janša, which was basically, although it had officially 38 votes out of 90 in Slovenian parliament, it was basically impossible to overthrow it. So it's all a matter of political skills. And regarding the polls, they say that the only polls that are valid are elections, but we can see that panic in the ranks of ruling party is high. You're probably not aware that 2 days ago, one organization which is very close, civil society organization, but which is very close to Mr. Janša and SDS, has already filed a constitutional complaint to Constitutional Court to problematize the outcome of the Sunday election. This is the same organization that 1 month ago tried to constitutionally forbid the existence of two political parties, Social Democrats and the left. Yesterday, the Commission for Informative Program at the Programming Council of Slovenian Public Broadcaster, which has now been taken over by SDS people, has had a session with only one article, and that is how to evaluate reporting about Robert Golob, about an affair that was brought out 2 days ago. You had a Slovenian postal company, which is stayed out and run by a member of SDS party, who yesterday delayed the sending of 30,000 ballot papers abroad. And you had also, we have seen in last weeks, intensifying personal attacks on the head of National Electoral Commission. So there's fear in Slovenia that even whatever happened on Sunday, it will not be over. So I think the tracing of this election will go now for few days or weeks. And I am very skeptical that Mr. Janša will concede defeat even if it happens, and will probably use every constitutional, legal, or public pressure to overcome its results. But previously, your question was about left or right forces in Slovenia. You have to know that basically every election in Slovenia after 2008 is referendum on Janez Janša. You have to know that Slovenian Democratic Party has 200 to 250,000 voters that regularly come on elections and post the ballots to vote for Slovenian Democratic Party. And that is, and then depends on the outcome, how high is that percentage. Sometimes it's 25, sometimes it's 28, sometimes it's 23. But so you have a majority of people who especially left to center, and now even some people on the center right that dislike Janša very much. So basically they go to election just to see Mr. Janša not win. So the consequence of that sentiment, which is the strongest sentiment that decides the Slovenian election, is a very fragilely structured political space on left and center left, and also in the liberal bloc. You have these fragmented parties which have a few thousand members. They change their names, they change their presidents, they evolve. Just because the voters on that side of Slovenian political specters are very demanding. Basically, they do not forgive anything. You have something that smells like affair, and the people who basically won the election, for instance, the person who won the election is out. On the right side, you don't have that. You have a almost religious loyalty to Janša. Janša is a veteran of Slovenian political spectrum. He's been on political scene for 30 years. He had a huge number of affairs. Several institutions investigated his assets because they were much, much higher than his official income. He was tried for corruption. His party attempted to loan €500,000 money from one proxy person in Bosnia and Herzegovina. He's basically a receiver of millions of pounds for his media apparatus. And basically, he posted, I don't know, several hundred violent and brutal and smear tweets against virtually everyone in Slovenia, but he still has this loyal base, which are basically a little older people that live outside of Ljubljana, especially in eastern Slovenia, because they keep buying his story about the deep state that runs Slovenian state, Slovenian institutions, and basically he's the only crusader justified to clean our country out of the grip of these forces from behind. I know it maybe sounds very little strange to someone from people from European democracies, but that's the political rhetoric we are dealing here with over the last 20-30 years.
Thank you very much, Primož, for your intervention. Maybe I would like to leave a little bit the domestic politics and difficulties and challenges which are there in the state structures, and maybe to take a look on one of our questions we have already, which is entering kind of also the area of or the regional and European perspective. Janša was a Minister of Defense in 1991. Could this have played a role in his support for Ukraine? He practically distanced himself from Orbán concerning Ukraine. Do Slovenians see a parallel situation with their war for independence in 1991? So it goes very much in what we already discussed a couple of times, but maybe Tanja, would you like to respond to this question?
Sure, thank you. Yes, the answer is on the second part of the question, which is we Slovenians, not just Prime Minister Janša. I hope I can speak for most of us or all of us. We see a big similarities between what happened to us when our country was invaded by the Yugoslav army. The war we fought, even though it was very brief, and what is going on in Ukraine, especially at the beginning. I can speak from my own personal experience. It was reminiscing of what we went through. It was not in such a scale, of course, what's going on now in Ukraine, but the sirens, the army marching in, like it's. So for Slovenes, and you could see that also with Prime Minister Janša, the way, and also all political leaders in Slovenia, everyone stood and stands behind Ukrainian people. There was no, even for political parties that used to be very, I will say, sympathetic to Moscow and to Kremlin in the past. After the invasion of Ukraine, this has changed, not 100%, 100 degrees, but many of those actors that used to show vis-a-vis Washington and Brussels favor Moscow kind of pulled back from that sentiment toward Moscow. So the way Prime Minister reacted, also he was very vocal on Twitter, his favorite channel of communication. But I think a lot of people in international communities, since I've been in this realm, have been surprised at how vocal and how I would say, unquestionably, we stood behind Ukraine from the beginning, not just the political elites. And it was surprising to many. But then I always explained, look, it was our personal experience, and not everyone is as young that wouldn't remember what happened to us. But it wasn't just Slovenia, it was all the war in entire Yugoslavia that left a big scar on so many of us that, and now seeing this in Ukraine, I think expecting anyone from this region not to support or be fully behind Ukrainian people, it's unimaginable. So I think Prime Minister acted on two sentiments. One was personal, and his role also that he played in the war of the independence for us. But then the second, of course, it was political calculation. Like, he's a politician. That's what he is. And so, opposition quickly attacked him in Slovenia. Oh, he's trying to gain political points. But of course, they are doing the same when they are attacking them for being too bold in attacking Russia for their actions. But this is politics. So I think he was, you can call it pragmatic, smart politician, what he was doing, what he's still doing. But at the same time, I believe he also, it seemed to me, that he acted from his personal feeling in terms of sympathy toward Ukrainian people and what's going on in a country. So hopefully that answered my question. And sorry, to just add, in terms of Orban and that he distanced himself, this part of the answer is kind of ties back to what Mr. Cirman was saying, which is kind of, I don't think Janez Janša was making alliances throughout these 2 years only in international arena, only with Visegrad leaders, but he had a very strong relationship, working relationship, diplomatic relationship with Chancellor Kurz and also Chancellor Merkel. So my view is that he was making alliances with his EPP friends. This is a political family, so he made, I would say, sure, he was sympathetic to Mr. Orban, but then he made this kind of pull away, which kind of goes back to what Dr. Lovec said earlier. I think Janez Janša realized that this wave of populism, like going in that direction that Mr. Orban went, kind of is not the way to go, because the international arena has changed, and he kind of wanted to go back to the center. He kind of saw that this is harming him in the Slovenian political arena, and I think he started not distancing, but kind of making other alliances long time ago. Remember that letter he wrote, open letter to Chancellor Merkel, when he was trying to kind of negotiate between Orban and Polish government and Brussels, or kind of like trying to be somewhere in the middle. So, and then he made, Chancellor Kurz came to Slovenia. So it was a lot of effort that I saw that he made to kind of present himself that he's not going, and his government and his party is not going in the direction of Mr. Orban. But I'm just speaking about the public appearance. I have no idea, behind the scenes what's going on. So then, thank you.
Thank you, Tanja. Then we have another question from audience, which is present here on site. So, could you please?
Yes, hello, I'm Marko of the Karl Renner Institute. Thank you also from my side to the panelists for the interesting insights into the Slovenian political landscape. My question touches upon the Social Democrats in Slovenia. As far as I know, they did better half a year ago in the polls, but they lost the momentum. Despite the more or less new leader, Tanja. Why are the Social Democrats not able to position themselves as the main political center-left party. Yeah, what's your take on this? Thank you.
Did you hear the question? Maybe Marko, would you like to comment on this?
Yeah, it's a difficult question. So it seems that they had this leading position in the cool opposition before Robert Golob's party came to the political scene, but they could not reach above certain threshold. Some might say that the reason is the female leader, because Slovenian electorate is still quite conservative, chauvinist to some extent, also the center-left part of the electorate. Some might say that. Others might say that if you look at why social democrats in Germany were able to win, you would notice that they focused on economy, on social issues, so minimum wage, housing, and things like that. Perhaps for social democrats here in Slovenia, if you look at their campaign, their program, this was not sufficiently presented as their main, as their main feature, as what they would offer if they would win the elections. And it might also be that it was difficult for them to focus just on that, because at the same time you had government with lots of money available by the EU and things like that who would spend on so many things. So how could they sort of convince people that they need to vote for social democrats if at the same time you have a center-right government which is spending on all sorts of things people would want to have? So it might also be that. If I may touch upon, briefly on what has been said so far, Primož might be right that Janša will try to delegitimize Sunday's elections. However, it would again be a huge mistake on his side. Look what has happened in the United States to Trump after he tried to delegitimize the elections. And on the Ukraine, of course, rhetoric is there. You can see it. But for me, the problem is that there's not much beyond the rhetoric, the symbolism, things that Prime Minister can do because he has a monopoly over presenting Slovenia's positions on different things as a prime minister. But beyond rhetoric, I mean, many countries have expelled Russian diplomats. We did not do that. We just reduced the number of their diplomats to the number of our diplomats in Moscow. We did not seize any assets of people close to Russian oligarchs. And I know that some things are not, out public, are sort of not shown, but I don't have any information on Slovenia sending any sorts of arms and things like that to Ukraine. There were even some strange statements made by Minister of Defense, who said that we don't have this sort of things we could give, or that we have to protect ourselves first and things like that. And also when it comes to humanitarian aid, we could do much more. So is there anything beyond the rhetoric and this this search for external legitimacy and recognition that Janša would want to see before the elections?
Thank you very much, Marko. Primož, you would like to?
Just few short replicas. First of all, I did not say that he will delegitimize election, but there are strong signs that suggest he might. We know that the people from SD's party have basically enhanced the repression apparatus of the state. They had the police, they had the anti-money laundering office, and there are signs that they're using these institutions for political purposes. Regarding Ukraine, there are, of course, similarities between Slovenia and Ukraine, but also dissimilarities. I would say that Ukraine is case is more similar to Croatia, because Slovenia did not have these quasi-states, separatistic states on his territory for a couple of years. The war luckily lasted only 10 days. and the military might of the Yugoslav army was much less used in Slovenia than it was used by Russian army in Ukraine. So I think that Ukraine is maybe more similar to Croatia. Maybe shows what would happen if Croatia hasn't freed its lands in '95. I don't know, but that's just my guess. But you can say that Janša changed his election campaign, the strategy on the day Ukrainian war started. Before that, it was based on all the money and achievements that this government has fulfilled during the COVID pandemic. After 24th of February, the new ads, the new billboards were put there with stability and security. We can provide that. And the TikTok video was launched with password "Heroes Never Run" and with photos of Volodymyr Zelensky and Janez Janša from '91. So basically, he saw himself as Zelensky, as he presented himself, as he always presents himself as the savior of Slovenia in 1991. Of course, he played a big role in 1991, but he was not the only one there. It was a collective achievement. 90% of Slovenians voted for independence. So basically, it was the finest hour of our nation. It was not a personal achievement. And I would like to also ask a short question. I saw that from Mr. Mihajlović. The journalists from communist times still play a role in Slovenian media. Generations have changed in recent years. For our news platform, they say we are anti-government, anti-Janša. I was 12 years old when the Slovenian independence was declared and the communism officially fell. The only my connection to communism is a Red Star on Heineken beer I love to drink. And the only former communist in Slovenian political landscape are two people. First is Mr. Janša, who was member of Communist Party, and the second one is current president Borut Pahor, which was a member of Central Committee in 1990. Sorry.
Thank you very much also for answering the question from the audience. And we have another comment. Democracy Index, as published by the intelligence group, gives different results as shown by Dr. Lovec. It shows an increase in democracy under present government. Marko, would you like to react on that?
Also, I would have to check the methodology of the index that is mentioned by one of the viewers, but I can tell you for the nations in transit by Freedom House that it's a comprehensive index with a methodology behind it, independent reviewers, independent national experts who do it, and it's one of the indexes that are the most cited and taken as a reference by not just civil society organizations and media, but also by academics. And it's not just Freedom House that is critical towards some of the changes we've seen in Slovenia in the last 2 years, but it's also a number of other organizations, international organizations in the sphere of media, in the sphere of human rights. So I would say that things on a number of important issues have not turned better in the last 2 years.
Thank you. Tanja, you would like to comment, right? Since we are running out of time, I would like to ask you for a short or brief intervention. Thank you.
Yes, I was also planning to. So to answer your earlier question in terms of Social Democrats, my very short comment is that the leadership, I think the previous commentators kind of alluded to, but I don't think the leadership by Mrs. Fajon, I don't think her leadership is weak because she's a woman or the voters don't vote for her, but I think her leadership is very weak. It was kind of confusing, and even though she's an experienced politician, I think the party, if they were able to find another candidate, a stronger candidate, they could benefit from a different candidate and gather more support by the voters. In terms of democracy, yes, there are various indexes, and as it was mentioned by Dr. Lovec, I didn't check any of these indexes today, but definitely in the last couple of years, if the indexes show or not but definitely that aspect of democracy, which is kind of not the main tier, but the like civil liberties and political culture in Slovenia has deteriorated. But since it was pandemic time, in many countries, these two categories have decreased. So we have to take that into account too. So it's not just, that our prime minister is saying things on Twitter that was unspeakable 4 years ago or 5 years ago, but it's like many leaders are. And likewise, during the pandemic, many countries have restricted human rights and freedoms, and that is reflected also in such indexes.
Thank you, Tanja. And now, finally, in order to kind of summarize our discussion today, I would like to ask you, all of you, what election result do you personally expect, and what implications it's gonna have on the domestic politics within the country? But please try to be as brief as possible. Maybe we can start with Marko.
So as I said before, the choice is between two suboptimal options, and I think that most of the voters will go against Janša, so they see this immediate threat of a strong man as the most important thing they have to react to. But then after that, we will all wake up with a headache sooner or later.
Thank you very much, Tanja.
Yeah, just to kind of add to that, I fear we will again have a minority government or very close to it. Like I fear that situation because it might happen. Hopefully, we will not have 9 political parties in a parliament again and 4 or more in a government. I think that would be a disaster. So what I'm hoping for is that, a government with 3 or ideally 2 political parties. I know that's not possible, but it would be so great to have such government in Slovenia. In Austria, you know how this is. So in the past, so that would be a change for Slovenia. But in terms of what to expect, probably a left-wing government, probably, but you never know.
Thank you, and Primož, please. Sorry, you are unmuted. You have to unmute.
Sorry. My prediction is that we'll have a left-center government after this election. I suspect that's on a statistic of early vote. However, what will happen after that? Basically, I'm not an oracle, so I cannot tell. But I can tell that the new government will take over Slovenia, which will be in under huge economic developmental and social challenges. And I think that if polarization of our political space will not minimize in the next year or 2, then we'll probably have run another circle like this in 2 or 4 years.
Thank you very much for your brief summary.
Thank you. I'll have to leave now, so thank you for having me. Bye-bye.
Sure. Thank you very much, Primož. Take care. And I would like also to thank to both of you, Marko and Tanja, for joining us for our, I would say, very much fruitful discussion today. I think we could actually discuss for next couple of hours the elections in Slovenia. But once again, many thanks for joining us today. I would like to also thank our cooperation partners, the Political Academy of the Austrian People's Party and the Karl Renner Institute for the organization of this traditional series. I would like to mention that this recording will be available on our IDM YouTube channel soon. And of course, last but not least, I would like to very much thank our audience who followed us until now. Be it in the Zoom platform or on our YouTube live stream. I hope you enjoyed the discussion as much as we did. Please follow our IDM social media channels to keep up to date regarding our activities. And I'm very much looking forward already now to see you again, be it here in person at IDM or online for our upcoming IDM events. So until then, I wish you all the best and take care.